In Ottawa, this morning, it's a damp start with rain in the forecast and temperatures climbing toward 13 degrees. Later in the brief, why Canada's Governor General is warning Greenland not to relax, even as Washington's attention seems to have moved on. The work week begins with wet roads and a mild feel for early March. Expect rain on and off, with temperatures around 3 this morning and closer to 13 later today. In Ottawa sports, the Senators had one of their loudest offensive nights in a while, beating Seattle 7-4. The swing in the game came during a multi-goal burst that helped Ottawa pull away. But there are two follow-ons that matter more than the final score. First, defenseman Jake Sanderson left with an upper body injury after a hard hit into the boards, and didn't return. There was no penalty on the play, and after the game the coach said he didn't have an update. Ottawa's next game is tonight in Vancouver, so any lineup decision will tell you a lot about how serious this is. Second, defenseman Tyler Kleven was fined just over $4,100 for a cross-check late in the third period. That's the maximum allowed under the CBA for that type of supplemental discipline, and it's the kind of thing that can quickly become a pattern the league watches. Turning now to the national picture, the Prime Minister's office says Mark Carney spoke Sunday with U.S. President Donald Trump. The readout is short: the economy, developments in the Middle East, and Canada-U.S. trade, with both leaders agreeing to stay in close contact. The key point here is what's not said: no details on tariffs, timelines, or specific files. So for now, it's a signal of ongoing engagement rather than a concrete shift. Now to the main thread today: Canada's Governor General, Greenland, and the question of what happens when a big power idea doesn't fully go away. Governor General Mary Simon is urging Greenlanders to stay wary, even though President Trump's public push to acquire Greenland has largely faded since January. Simon's message in plain terms: people in Greenland felt real anxiety when this was being discussed openly, and even if it's quieter now, the idea could come back. Here's what's happening. In January, Trump argued the United States should take over Greenland for national security reasons. After a meeting in Davos on January 21st, he said there was a framework of a future deal, but few specifics ever emerged, and nothing credible indicating Denmark would simply hand Greenland over. Since then, Trump has mostly stopped mentioning Greenland, with one brief moment in late February tied to a medical evacuation situation near Greenlandic waters, when he suggested sending a hospital ship. Why this matters now is less about one headline and more about the atmosphere it created. Greenland is part of the Danish realm. Denmark handles foreign policy and defense. So when a U.S. president floats a takeover, it puts Greenland's political future and Denmark's sovereignty into a public bargaining space, even if no formal process follows. The risk here is uncertainty. It affects how residents feel, how local leaders plan, and how allies signal support. Simon is a particularly relevant voice on this because she has deep Arctic diplomatic experience, including serving as Canada's first ambassador for circumpolar affairs, and previously as ambassador to Denmark. Canada's position, as Simon describes it, is support for Greenland and Denmark, and a preference for continued dialogue between Greenland and Denmark about Greenland's future. That's a careful framing. It reinforces sovereignty and stability, without trying to speak for Greenland's domestic politics. A quick supporting signal from elsewhere in Canada: the federal government is also facing pressure at home to show what plans actually do. Critics are calling Ottawa's Sustainable Jobs Action Plan, released in February, more of a compilation of existing programs than a new set of targeted supports for energy workers who could be displaced by economic shifts, clean technology, and AI. Different topic, same underlying theme. When governments publish a framework, people immediately ask what changes on the ground. And one political storyline to keep an eye on this week: voting begins today in the federal NDP leadership race, with a winner expected March 29th. Frontrunner Avi Lewis says if he wins, he won't seek a by-election right away and would focus first on rebuilding party operations and finances after last year's election setback. Before we wrap, here's the final piece to watch. In Ottawa, keep an eye on the Senator's status report on Jake Sanderson ahead of tonight's game in Vancouver. If he's out, you'll likely see ripple effects in minutes, matchups, and special teams. Nationally, watch for any follow-up to the Carney Trump call that adds specifics, particularly on trade, because the official readout was broad. And on the Arctic thread, The next indicator isn't a speech, it's whether the U.S. starts using Greenland language again in security or procurement discussions. Even small references can change the temperature quickly in a place that's already been through the turmoil once. That's the briefing for Monday, March 9th. Stay dry out there, and we'll be back tomorrow.